The late afternoon sun dipped behind the worn Appalachian peaks. Long shadows crept over the deserted road. Adjusting my rear view, I caught a glimpse of the encroaching twilight. The map I'd printed from the old internet cafe in town lay wrinkled and dog-eared on the passenger seat. It seemed ancient in an age of GPS on every phone, but I prefer the tangible to the intangible any day. I've always had a preference for things I could touch and feel, a habit that had brought me deep into the remote mountains on a quest for solitude, somewhere I could be at once surrounded by, immersed in, and within reach of the beauty and peace offered only by nature. As the last of the sunlight bled away, smearing the clouds with a soft peachy red glow, I spotted an old weathered signpost that was half hidden by overgrown bushes. "Welcome to Quiet Oaks," the sign announced with its badly faded, almost ghostly letters. I'd never heard of the town. It hadn't been on my map. I braked and picked up the map to have one more look, and it wasn't there. I laughed, my sense of adventure rising to the fore. I had found something that technology hadn't even found. In this day, that's saying something, in my opinion. With my curiosity piqued, I turned down the narrow, winding road. The gravel had washed out in a lot of spots, and I was left maneuvering my car around ruts and potholes. I didn't even care that it was almost dark either. I'd found something that I could tell everyone about. A little backwoods town hidden deep within the Appalachian Mountains of Tennessee. I drove for what seemed like an hour, but it might have only been 20 or 30 minutes. It was dark, the road unfamiliar, and there were road hazards that slowed me down a lot. I figured if the road had been in better condition, and it had been daylight, the drive would have been cut in half. The town of Quiet Oaks emerged from the thickening dust. It was a relic of another era. I glanced at the printed paper map on the passenger seat and chuckled. I too was a relic of a bygone era. Maybe not as bygone as the one the little town represented, but I digress. Buildings stood eerily intact, but devoid of any sign of life. Storefronts sporting big dusty display windows lined Main Street, the displays frozen in time. It seemed like maybe something happened in the 40s or 50s and everyone had left the place. Left it just like it was. What would have caused the whole town just to up and leave without at least taking the goods from the stores? An antique clock on the lamppost ticked quietly, but its hands were stuck at 6:13. That was odd. How did those things even run? Electricity? Some kind of super long life batteries? Or did someone have to wind them up every so often? I was sure they didn't have solar-powered anything back in the time Quiet Oaks had been an active town. I parked and got out of the car. The crunch of gravel and the breeze whispering through the nearby trees were the only sounds in the stillness. I looked at the storefronts to the left and then to the right. A general store, a pharmacy, a restaurant, a men's clothing store, and a woman's clothing store in separate buildings, which struck me as oddly humorous. There was a candy and gift shop as well, which I found nostalgic, with its display windows showing off wooden ships, trains, horses, and a bunch of other handmade kids' toys. That stuff was made with love and genuine pride, unlike anything you could find in the stores today. Stepping onto the concrete sidewalk, I leaned forward and cupped my hands to the window. It didn't do any good though. I could only see what my headlights illuminated at the front. The interior was too dark already to see anything more. Dark was falling around me quickly. It does that in the mountains. One minute it's dusk, the next you're pulling out a flashlight to see in front of your face. I wanted to avoid being too far from the car when full dark hit Quiet Oaks. I'm adventurous, but not that adventurous. There were bears and mountain cats in those ancient mountains, and I didn't want to have a run-in with either. I turned to look at the rest of the little town. "Hello? Anybody here?" I called out, my voice bouncing and echoing against the silent facades. There was no response, but I hadn't really expected one. I walked further into the town, past the derelict diner, and grinned as an abandoned aged barber shop came into view at the edge of the light thrown by the headlights. The air was suddenly colder, cold enough that it chilled me. A shiver ran through me and I pulled my jacket tighter. If the cold kept up, I would have to zip it and pull up my hood. I didn't mind though, it was actually refreshing. I turned and walked up the sidewalk in the opposite direction. The headlights were facing that direction, so I had a wider area I could see and explore if the sun completely disappeared. I approached the town square and noticed another one of those antique clocks. That one was larger, and its hands were still. It had stopped at 5:21. As I moved toward it to get a closer look, the streetlights, old and covered in cobwebs as they were, flickered to life. They cast a sickly yellowish glow over everything. Large bobbing shadows played over the ground around me, and I was confused until I remembered the cobwebs coating the lights. A sense of unease uncoiled inside me, winnowing out from my midsection, sending tendrils of caution tainted with fear through my whole body. Some inexplicable pull drew me farther away from my car and deeper into the square. A warped wooden pavilion stood to one side, its posts covered in ivy. The interior was cast into darkness. My guts tightened unpleasantly as I noted the tree line behind it. There were so many trees crammed closely together. Even in the daylight, the tree line would have been impenetrable there. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? See, a big predator would have a hard time rushing out at me from the trees that closed together, so I guess it was probably a good thing. The sound of the wind grew a little louder, and a chill ran down my spine. For a second, I thought I heard a voice whispering in that wind. It scared the hell out of me. Scared me so bad that I couldn't move. My body locked, and I stared wide-eyed into that tight tree line. Was someone there? The wind died down and silence enveloped the town. After a minute, I was able to convince myself the voice I had thought I had heard was just the wind. It was so quiet that I think I could have heard a leaf rattle half a mile away, and I heard nothing in that deep silence. No voice, no critters, and no rattling leaves. The only things alive there were me and my imagination. Now I figured I'd have a quick peek into a couple more storefront windows and then beat feet out of there. It was way too close to being full dark for my liking, especially after spooking myself about that voice. I went back to the window of the candy shop and I looked inside. Again, it was just so damn dark that I could barely see anything. I went to the door, just for curiosity's sake, and tried the handle. The loud click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the silence, but the door swung inward easily and quietly. I cringed as the bell above the door tinkled to alert the owner of the new customer. And again, there was that whole business of spooking myself. What owner would be up there? It'd have to be a ghost. I tried to laugh, but the sound made the hairs on my arms stand up. It's like I was yelling obscenities in a church. It felt irrelevant to make any loud noise, so I piped down and I shut up. 12 of those big glass containers of candy lined the long counter. They were the kind they used to sell candy out of, maybe, 100 years ago. I walked quickly along the counter, wondering what kind of candy was in each container. They were unidentifiable after so long in the jars that I wasn't familiar with any of them. Maybe I should have been if I could have made out a single piece of candy in any of the jars, but I couldn't. I turned to leave and saw a shelf with candy bars laying in stacks that had shifted only slightly since they'd been last stocked there. I picked up a bar and looked at the label. Jack Dempsey Milk Chocolate 5 cents. There was a small oval picture of a man in a suit looking very 1950-ish. I took it to be that Jack Dempsey guy the candy was named after, but I wasn't sure. I was no more familiar with him than I was with those loose candies that had long ago melted together in misshapen lumps covered with old sugar crystals. I thought about putting the candy bar in my pocket, and then every horror movie I'd ever watched flooded through my head all at once. If I learned anything from those movies, it was to leave shit where you find it, especially if it's old and abandoned. Not wanting to take a ghost or a demon home with me that might have been attached to the stuff in the store. I tossed the bar back to the shelf, and I went for the car. It was still silent outside. I stood by the car door and listened. There had to be some kind of noise somewhere. Nowhere could be this quiet. Then the wind began to move, very gentle at first, and then harder. As it died again, I heard it. The voice. My guts almost twisted in a knot. It was a low, almost imperceptible whisper, and if not for the distant formation of words, I would have passed it off again. "Help us," the wind whispered, the voice melding with the wind, sowing through the leaves and wrapping around me. "Help us." It repeated as it curled up and disappeared into the buzzing, flickering streetlight to my left. I could hear them again. The streetlights. I don't know what had dampened their sound before, but whatever it was gone. The voice came again, louder, more insistent, and I scanned empty windows for the source, but nothing had changed. There was still no sign of life. A moth beat its wings against the diner's window. A bat swooped and snatched it, flying straight up and disappearing into the black of the sky. I was standing out in the open. I was an open target, just like that moth. I doubted that anything could swoop down and snatch me up like the bat did that moth, but I didn't think it was wise to keep pushing my luck and going against my gut. It was telling me to get my ass in the car and to get out of Quiet Oaks. But that whispering came again, sounding as if someone were darting out from between buildings, whispering loudly and then ducking back out of sight before I could catch a glimpse. Now, I don't know about you, but the thought of a real flesh and blood person doing that was way scarier than the thought of any ghost. The headlights started dimming and then they flickered weakly. No, I yelled as I yanked open the door. The ghost or the weirdo whispering in the street entirely left my mind in that moment because, holy shit, the lights dimming like that could mean only one thing. The battery was dead. I turned the key, my heart thundering. Nothing but 5 clicks. Each successive clicking sound was weaker and slower than the previous one. I had jumper cables, but they were worth shit out here in the middle of nowhere. There was an old automotive store past the town square and on the opposite side of the main thoroughfare. I mean, what were the chances there was anything in that store that might help me? And I answered my own stupid question. Slim to none. And Slim just left town. Like you should have. Now, no way in hell I was going to walk out of that place. Not in the dark, anyway. And I didn't think sitting there all night in my dead car would be smart either. I was right under the streetlight, a sitting duck just begging someone to shoot me. Now, I won't lie. Took a good while to work up the nerve to walk to the auto store. It was way further than the perceived semi-safety of my car than I wanted to be, but I finally did screw up the courage, and I went. Throwing back my shoulders, holding my head up high, chin thrust outward. No overactive imagination was going to scare me like I was a little girl. No, I was a man, and men could take care of any problem that came up. I took out my phone and I turned on the flashlight app. The door of the shop, just like with the door of the candy shop, opened without much complaint. I went inside, squinting to see into the darkness beyond where the light from my phone reached. Shadows, darker than the night, moved behind the counter. I jerked the light in that direction, but it was murky back there. I moved closer and called out. At first, my voice didn't seem to carry far at all. I forced myself to call out louder. There was no answer except for the oppressive silence. As the light began to relieve the murkiness, shadows fled up walls, across the counter, and skittered in every direction. My logical mind said, hey, this is normal. It was caused by the movement of the light source. But my illogical mind, the one we all seem to heed more often in scary situations, said they were shadows of entities not of this earth. I tried calling out one more time, but my voice sounded small and uncertain in the empty space. I leaned over the counter, shining my light to the floor. No one there. I was alone. Grinning with relief and a bit of self-loathing, I stood straight. My elbow brushed an old yellowed newspaper laying open on the counter. A headline caught my attention. Residents of small rural town disappeared. And the date at the top of the paper was July 12th, 1952. The article detailed the strange disappearance of all 117 residents of Quiet Oaks. The people had simply vanished, leaving all their belongings behind. It had taken a while for anyone to notice, and the article stated that the residents could have been gone for months when the disappearances were discovered by officials. Officials who apparently didn't spend too long investigating. Now, what's a 6-month investigation when a whole damn town has disappeared? The article ended by saying there was no sign of a struggle, no evidence of violence, and no clues of what had truly happened in Quiet Oaks. Tossing the paper down, I tried to forget what I'd read. I needed a battery charger. A battery? Hell, I would have taken a bicycle at that point. I just wanted out of Quiet Oaks. I moved behind the counter and toward an open doorway that I was pretty sure would lead into a garage where there might be something that I could use. It dawned on me that if the streetlights were still working, there might be electricity still in the building too. As I crossed the threshold, I searched the wall for a light switch. It was there, a big one that had 4 switches. I flipped them all. A single ballast hummed to life overhead, and a fluorescent tube flickered. It wasn't much light, and it was aglow compared to the daylight setting on my phone, but it at least gave me some light. I had entered a garage area. A 1940s step-side Chevy truck sat in one of the 2 bays, its hood up, and the whole thing covered in dust and cobwebs. "Help us," a faint voice called out. My guts turned to ice, and my hand tightened around the phone. Where had the voice come from? "Please, help," the voice came again. And again, there was no definite direction. I spun in a circle, holding out the phone. "Who's there?" "Show yourself," I yelled. My voice carried that time with no problem. It bounced around the large and mostly empty space with alarming clarity. A shadow morphed just beyond the truck. It was the size of a child, and as my heart screamed for me to help him, my feet had another idea. I was running out around the counter. Screw the car with the dead battery. I didn't care that it was night. I was getting out of that place, even if I had to do it on foot. As I ran past the car, I saw another child-sized figure come into view. It was only there briefly, for the span of one of my panicked heartbeats, but it was there all the same, standing under the stuttering streetlight in the town square. I aimed for the center of the road, my feet slipping in the gravel, and then I was headed out, down that narrow, rutted road that led straight into pitch darkness. As I ran, small shadows appeared and disappeared along the sides of the road, just at the edges. They flickered in and out like that damn streetlight, and I thought my heart would explode in my chest. The next article written about Quiet Oaks would be about me, the stupid outsider who didn't have sense enough to stay out of the place. I ran through a section of road that I remembered for its deep ruts and tight curve. The forest bore down on me from both sides, and as I reached the other side of the curve, I stopped so suddenly that my feet skidded and went out from underneath me. Standing across the road, only a few feet ahead, were those child-sized figures, all flickering in and out, and then remaining solid. "Help us, mister," a little boy said, stepping forward, holding out his pale hands. I scrambled backwards, but couldn't get to my feet. "Stay away," I yelled at the figure. 2 more kids moved toward me, their hands out in supplication, their eyes wide, large, dark, and pleading. "Go to hell," I yelled as I continued scooting backwards. I got my feet underneath me and bolted away. I looked over my shoulder, but it was too dark to see much. I didn't see any signs of the kids within the light from my phone, though. As I turned to face the way I was running, I hit something solid and bounced off of it. I landed hard, thinking I had run into a tree. In my panic, I had veered off the road and into the woods. But I landed into a pothole and gravel bit into my hands. My lungs constricted as fear clamped around me like an icy steel band. I panned my light outward slowly, and 2 feet came into view. Gnarled, mottled, dark gray and brown, and larger than any human's feet should be. I moved the light upward even though I was sure I didn't want to see more. The oddly female-looking creature towered over me, her eyes glowing like burning coals. Roots spiraled around her torso and limbs like ropey muscles and moved like snakes under a thin layer of mossy skin. A tangled mass of ivy and vines spilled from her head like hair. The whole thing was infested with large, crawling insects, and the foul, acrid odor of decaying leaves and damp, moldy earth wafted down from her and encircled me. There was no running left in me. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was hold the light with one shaking hand so that it illuminated the monstrosity, and I couldn't turn around when I heard the horde of little feet scampering toward me from behind. It was the kids I already knew, and I was powerless to even try escaping. The kids ran around me and huddled close to the creature, and I swear to you, that hideous thing smiled at them. She loved them. I could feel her love for them, and that terrified me more than anything else had. I'm not sure why, but it did. The kids began to change. They were turning into smaller copies of the giant creature. My brain screamed that they were all on one side of me and that I might be able to get away, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The mother, well, that's what she was, right? The mother to those smaller monsters. She bent forward and bits and pieces of her littered the ground around me, hit me in the face, and insects rained down. Screaming, I covered my face with my arms. Disgust and horror are powerful emotions on their own, but mixed together, they're downright deadly. She closed a bark and moss-covered hand around one of my arms, and at that moment, I realized just how real she was. No chance it was a mental break, a psychotic episode, or a night terror. She was real, and she had me in her grasp. A few of her children taunted me. They gnashed their teeth close to me, and I swung wildly, batting them away as their mother turned slowly and began dragging me into the forest. I dropped the phone and began pulling at the bark of her hand. She didn't acknowledge my efforts, just kept walking with slow, steady steps. She didn't get far into the woods until we came to a large cave. She dragged me in front of her, and then dangled me like a doll. The smaller ones jumped and reached for my feet, and I felt like a piñata at a kid's birthday party. Only I'd spill guts and gore when they tore me open. The mother tossed me into the cave and my arm got a load of splinters as it slipped from her grip. Before I hit the rocky ground of the cave, a thought came to me fully formed and ready for execution. Wood burns. I'd been going to quit smoking for a year prior, but, for some reason I couldn't kick the habit completely. I couldn't stop smoking at least part of a cigarette after meals. Now I know it's a foul and stupid habit, but I can't say I'm sad that I hadn't already quit. I hit the ground and the small creatures flooded into the cave. I reached into my pocket and brought out my Zippo lighter. I rolled the wheel of the lighter as the first child monster ripped into my ankle. I screamed, but kept flicking that wheel until the flame jumped to life. I grabbed the closest monster, pulled it to me, and touched the fire to its middle. A shriek tore through the closed space with ear-splitting violence, and the flaming creature ran out through the crowded opening of the cave. And to my delight, I watched small flames take hold and light up another creature. It pinwheeled its arms, ran in a confused circle, and spread that flame to all of its siblings. I scrunched up against the wall of the cave that was lit up brightly, but filling quickly with smoke. The mother grabbed the burning children, bellowing and roaring as she tried to save them. The fire spread to her, and I watched in horror as it spread slowly down the roots around her torso, snaking under the mossy skin of her legs, and burst out through it. When the screams died down, the mother's feet and lower legs had been burned to cinders. She dropped to her thigh stubs and her hands. The flames squealed as they devoured the ivy and vines and tore into her face. She opened her maw and bellowed at me, and she started to crawl into the cave toward me. She struggled across the ashes of her fallen children. The pain and hate were laced through every wordless scream she emitted. But I was trapped. Bits of her malformed chimera body fell away and crumbled under her weight as the fire reduced her, piece by piece, to ash. She lost her ability to scream halfway through the cave as her chest burst outward in a sunburst of flame. Her lower body came off right after. She clawed at the ground, dragging her upper chest and head toward me. My own screams had stopped, and I had almost resigned myself to a horrible death. Then her head flamed from inside, the fire shooting out of her mouth and eyes toward me. The heat singed the hair on my arms and burned away the skin from the back of my right hand as I shielded my face. She crumbled around my mangled leg. Now I don't know how long I had laid there, but I eventually crawled out of the cave and made my way back to the car. It started. My phone still had no signal, but that didn't matter to me. I drove out of that abandoned little town and to the nearest emergency room. When questioned, I started to tell them the truth, but knew how it would sound. I didn't want them putting me somewhere that I would have no need of paper maps or GPS ever again, so I told them that I fell into my campfire. My leg was mangled, and I couldn't come up with a good lie for that one. But I didn't tell them the truth. I said it was a raccoon. It attacked me, and that's why I fell into the campfire. One nurse pursed her lips and rolled her eyes at me, but said nothing to contradict my story. She's the one that brought my release papers, and she stood there grinning at me as if we both shared some secret. I asked why she was looking at me like that. "Hey, you're just some storyteller, mister." I started to argue that it was the truth. I was too close to getting out of there to let anything go wrong. She held up a hand to shush me and took the signed paperwork. She ripped my copies off the clipboard and handed them to me. Looking over the top of her glasses, she winked. "It's your lie, sweetheart, so you just go on and you tell it however you want." I left and I never gone back. Not just to that abandoned town, but I've never gone back to the woods for anything. And I never will.